Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media conference. The number one topic to address with the media and our public of Trinidad and Tobago here today is the continuing aftershock and tremors that we've experienced here this morning, and I assume throughout parts of Trinidad and Tobago. We were in the cabinet room when we felt it. This morning, it is, as you all would all know by now, the aftershock was measured at about 5.9 on the Richter scale. It was 41 kilometers east-southeast of Carapuno, Venezuela, and at a depth of 80 kilometers. As we had suggested earlier on, and since 5:30 yesterday afternoon, with these types of sequences, we expect to have some aftershocks. It is impossible to scientifically predict what will be happening next and when the aftershocks will take place, if there will be further earthquakes, etc. What I can say is that the state's apparatus are in place, national security, all of the arms of national security are where they need to be, and we are monitoring the situation. The Ministry of Works and Transport, the engineers have been out focusing as their priority on state-owned government buildings to start with, and whilst they were in the process of certifying as safe a number of these buildings, the aftershock took place. As we had announced previously, we have asked, and there have actually been quite a lot of volunteers from structural engineers and civil engineers, etc., to assist the state in performing this exercise of making sure or providing certification of the structural integrity of some of the buildings that have been affected. What we're asking, what we've also taken a decision as a state to do, is those buildings that are tenanted by the state, so owned by private landlords, we've asked the private landlords to get their engineers to come and do the analysis of the buildings, which will then be looked at by the Ministry of Works and Transport engineers. Because as you would expect, there are a lot of people requesting the services of the state from a structural engineering point of view and checking out the integrity of these buildings. So that process is taking place. There have been closures of a number of offices, and this list, I am sure, has increased since I was provided with the information. Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries headquarters in Chaguanas, offices at the Ministry of Finance, the head office at Eric Williams Financial Complex, Port of Spain, offices of Treasury Division, main office of Independence Square, some of the pay branch cashiers on St. Vincent Street, the pension branch on St. Vincent Street, Ministry of Social Development Family Services, head offices located at the CL building, the NAUS building, the ABMA building, Ministry of Education headquarters on St. Vincent Street, the Ministry of Public Administration, the Ministry of Labour, Small Enterprises, and even though there was clearance given at the the AGLA Tower on government campus, it is our understanding that when there were some aftershocks, some of the staff left. But then the Ministry of Attorney General and Legal Affairs building on South Quay in Port of Spain was also closed today. The number of these ministries are increasing. For example, I was told when I came out of cabinet that the Ministry of National Security had taken a decision to send staff home. All we can say as a government at this stage is that persons should not take any unnecessary risks. We would expect persons to behave in a responsible manner and not in an irresponsible manner. So persons, and including private entities that are taking decisions to send their staff home, and in the government sector, we expect it to be done on the basis of some level of evidence and for proper decision-making to be taken. This brings me to a point that is becoming somewhat dangerous at this stage, and that is the fake news that is circulating on social media and otherwise. As a government and as a Minister of National Security, I personally denounce all of those persons who are circulating fake news. So there are a number of voice notes that are being circulated, there are a number of photographs, memes, etc. that are being circulated. This is very irresponsible. It is something that is completely denounced and something that is unacceptable. I know, pleading with persons who are circulating this, that they are unlikely to take heed, and they will continue with their mischievous ways. But those mischievous ways can have very detrimental circumstances beyond what you may be comprehending when you circulate this fake news. Another matter that I'd like to bring to the public's attention is we are getting reports. I've gotten a number of reports of Mr. Watson Duke making his way throughout what I was told, Port of Spain, and certain government agencies and buildings, and encouraging workers to leave the workplace. That is denounceable. It is completely irresponsible behavior on his part. He is engaging in disruptive activity, and I would like at this stage to remind the public that Mr. Watson Duke, whilst holding the presidency of the Public Service Association and as a trade union leader, is also playing very actively in the realm of politics as the minority leader of a political party in Tobago. I am simply here today to ask all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who are interested in the proper administration and good governance of Trinidad and Tobago to act in responsible manners and not to encourage people to engage in any panic activity, any illegal activity, because in fact what he is doing there can be connotated as illegal activity, or any irresponsible activity that may have consequences that you're not contemplating. So please be aware that there is a circulation of fake news taking place. The ODPM is the government's, one of the main sources of the government's proper news in circumstances such as this, and an information provider. I have given instructions to all of the heads of our national security apparatus, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, both the Defence Force arm, that is the Army, as well as the Coast Guard side, our SSA, our fire services, and our prison services, to send personnel who are vetted to the National Operations Fusion Center for the foreseeable future. So 24/7 it will be manned by persons from those agencies so they can get an inflow of information. ODPM is also going to be there so we can ensure that the best possible information that the state has is properly circulated to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I think we can expect some continued aftershocks or continued seismic movement. As I say, it is impossible to predict this. The state is going to continue monitoring everything. We're going to monitor it both from a safety and security perspective. We continue to say that if anyone has any concerns with respect to any matter arising out of this, these are the contact numbers you should contact. Emergency number 999. The ODPM's number is 511. And then you can contact the National Operations Fusion Center at 623-5202. In addition to this, all of the disaster relief management arms of every municipal corporation, that's the 14 municipal corporations in Trinidad, are out and on the ground. We've asked them to go out and assess the damage, to assist people who are in need, and also to feed that information back into our system, where ODPM will be charged with the responsibility of collating it, collecting it, and keeping our citizens informed as we go along. We've been in contact with Tobago. Things seem to be okay in Tobago. TEMA is doing a good job in Tobago. That's their Tobago Emergency Management Agency. And they too are filtering the information that they have back to the ODPM. As a result of this morning's aftershock, there was some power outage, I'm told, in the Point Cumana, West Moorings area. It was told to us that from a geographical or a structural point of view, a seismic point of view, that point is actually where you would expect the most amount of shock activity or seismic activity to be taking place. I'm happy to report that even though the electricity went down in those areas, it was reported to us it was back up and running by 11 o'clock this morning. So once again, I just ask all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to continue about your business. Do not take unnecessary risks. Our police service are out in full force. We've asked for more mobile patrols. We've asked them to slow down their mobile patrols, to just touch base with persons. The municipal corporations are out and about doing what they need to do. The Ministry of Works and Transport engineers, as you would expect, are being flooded with requests. They have a prioritization list. Persons who want the assistance of these engineers, please call into the Ministry of Works and Transport or make contact with them. We're formulating a list which should then be prioritized. We ask persons who have their some of these high-rises to get their private civil engineers to take a look at the structural integrity of these buildings, and then that will be looked at by the Ministry of Works and Transport. Citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, in a time like this is when we all come together. We all work together for the betterment of Trinidad and Tobago and to protect each and every one of us. We are, at the end of the day, our sisters and brothers keepers, and all of those who are interested in bettering and developing Trinidad and Tobago will work together with the authorities to do so. I publicly denounce those who are intent on being destructive and utilizing a time where people are understandably anxious and nervous. I will draw attention at this stage to one of the social media posts that I saw yesterday right after the event took place. Very irresponsible behavior by Mr. Devon Maraj, where on his Facebook page he posted some of the destruction that took place by the Roxy roundabout, it appeared, and destruction to a car, etc., and was making the most flippant statements along with that post. That type of behavior, as a patriot of Trinidad and Tobago, is not acceptable. And we just ask everybody to behave in a responsible manner at this time when people are understandably nervous. I can tell you that the fire services have also contacted me and told me that they had touched base with the schools in Trinidad and Tobago. Thankfully, most of them are closed at this stage, and in particular the chemicals that are held at the labs to see whether there was any damage, anything that needed cleaning up, etc. And they've told me that everything is fine in that area. Our health centers continue to be monitored. The Minister of Health has put out a notice. Go to the health centers and the various hospitals only if you need to or you believe you need assistance, etc. And it is business as usual. The engineers attached to the state, including UDCOT and some of these other organizations, are making their way around Trinidad and Tobago to ensure the structural integrity of buildings. I expect more reports of damage. I knock on wood. I'm thankful. We thank God for at this stage there is no report of any fatality or any serious injury as a result of this recent seismic activity. We hope that it stays that way. It is also being suggested that the building, whilst we don't have formal building codes in Trinidad and Tobago, the structural integrity of our buildings have stood up, and for that we thank the civil engineers and those others who would have built to certain standards, etc. And we just continue to maintain our alertness and to ensure that things are operating in a particular order. And if there are any concerns, once again, we ask that you contact the National Security Apparatus 999 in the first instance, which is our emergency number, 511, which is the ODPM, and then you can contact the National Operations Fusion Center at 623-5202, which is going to be manned 24/7. We're also utilizing our CCTV camera system, which was very useful yesterday evening when I assembled with the heads of national security. I would like to thank the heads of our national security bodies and arms for their consistent approach to these matters and for us all working together in coordination. That is our new Commissioner of Police, Mr. Gary Griffith, the Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Harold Phillip, our Director of SSA, Colonel George Robinson, the acting Chief of Defence Staff, Colonel White. We now have Commodore Pritchard is back with us. We welcome him back. The Chief Fire Officer, Mr. Bruce, and our Acting Commissioner of Prisons, Mr. Dane Clark. All of these officers, their various arms, Captain Neville Wint from the ODPM, for all working together, and thankfully all in unison. We're all on the same page to ensure the public safety and security of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I am certain that during daylight and over the next 24 hours, maybe even 48 hours, there will be more reports of damage coming in. There will be more assessments coming in. Matters will be treated on a case-by-case basis by public and private employees, and we just continue to maintain good order and denounce anybody who wants to circulate fake news or make a mockery or jokes of what we're currently experiencing, and also those who want to encourage persons in what may be illegal activity and behavior. There's only one other matter I'd like to address before I open for questions. You would have seen a release yesterday from the Office of the Prime Minister indicating that there was supposed to be a signing of the terms of the development agreement for the development of the Dragon gas field, which is an across-border field. You have heard us speaking about it. We've been leading the negotiations for some time now. I'm happy to say that we have come to a conclusion on those negotiations for the developmental terms, including the price and volumes, etc. There was supposed to be a signing today between Shell, PDVSA, and NGC, and a high delegation of Venezuelan authorities here, along with our government's authorities and representatives, as a result of what happened, because as you know that the seismic activity yesterday was actually right off of the coast of Venezuela, etc., in communicating with the government of Venezuela last night. And I think up to about 10 o'clock last night, a decision was taken that the Prime Minister will lead a delegation of certain ministers and NGC. We are going to invite members of the media to accompany us to Caracas on Saturday morning. The Office of the Prime Minister will be reaching out to the various media houses to extend that invitation. Obviously, space is limited, but we will do as we had done on the previous occasion and find a way to carry as many of you across as is possible. It will be the Honorable Prime Minister leading Minister Moses, or Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Minister of Energy, Minister Khan, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Alison West, and our Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs, Shamfa Cujo, and myself across to Venezuela on Saturday for us to complete the signing or to witness the signing of the Dragon terms and conditions and agreements between PDVSA, NGC, and Shell, and then also the governments will also sign a document as we move forward. So we look forward to that taking place on Saturday, and I've given the reason why, unfortunately, it couldn't take place today, with the governments dealing with a number of different issues. At this stage, I'll open it up for questions. Jewel?
Minister Stuart Young from TV6 News. One of the things I would just like to get clarification from you on, given the magnitude of the earthquake last evening and the aftershock felt, at least in the capital city, does the government have a specific plan for a natural disaster of this type, or are you basically going on the fly here, adapting as you go along?
Absolutely not. Yes, the government does have plans and policies, as you would expect, in place. In these types of situations, the ODPM leads the charge, and they would have all of the policies in place. And that's why you would see us reaching out for local government, because of course that then covers the whole of Trinidad and Tobago and Timor in Tobago. There are policies and procedures and protocols in place, and they are the assembling of all of the players in the same place, same spot, so decisions can be made as and when information is coming in. So it is not on the fly, it's not as it is going along. As things go along, I'm sitting in the seat now, and we see certain things that we think can be improved upon. Of course, we'll make a note of it and say, look, that needs to be improved upon. For example, one of the areas of communication. A lot of people yesterday, when they felt the effects of the tremors, the first thing I assume they did was reach on their telephones, their mobile phones, to call their loved ones, persons they were concerned about. That then, of course, overburdened the phone system. There is no phone system in the world that can take every subscriber onto the system at the same point in time. Fortunately, the data connectivity stayed up. Persons then were using, I assume, voice over internet protocols like WhatsApp, etc., to make calls, and that type of thing happened. You saw subsistence, and then you saw it go back up and down. So we are looking at these types of areas. Some of us had gone for crisis management training in the US last year, and in some of the areas where they experienced tornadoes and all sorts of these natural disasters, that's what they told us. They said one of the things that happens in these situations is cell phone communications can go down. The cell towers can go down. The systems become overburdened. So these are the areas we're looking at. What I would like to see, and we will be driving, is a public education program, because I think it is important that persons know, and we have to utilize new tools in getting our information out. What are the various emergency response telephone numbers for your municipal corporation, because they are the first responders and these types of things. So yes, there is a national plan in place, policy in place. There are a lot of experienced people at the helms of these various agencies, and they are working well together.
You did speak about the responsibility of employers in terms of whether or not employees are sent home or so on. We have seen the closure of certain government facilities while they are doing assessments of buildings. Why did the cabinet not give an instruction, for today at least, especially with the expectation of an aftershock, at least one, to basically say, well, look, at least for maybe government services, have people stay home while you assess, like, for example, the tall buildings, other office spaces, even for the private sector, to have a day off while you assess those buildings?
You have to understand that there are a lot of knock-on effects of such a decision. So when we had experienced the bad weather of Brett, you all would recall a couple of years ago, one of the decisions we had to take at that stage is, do we call for a national shutdown, etc. When you shut down the system, it does take a while to get back up. You lose economic activity, etc. The government was very, very careful, because we can't make that assessment, and especially in something that we experienced yesterday, of which buildings may have suffered damage, which may not have suffered damage. That is on a case-by-case basis. So the government's position to the country yesterday was, and to all of the persons who are faced in decision-making roles, including private and public sector, you do your own initial assessment. Don't take any risk. The government does not have the ability in a short space of time to go and examine every single building in Trinidad and Tobago. But what you do is you ask persons, you do your initial assessment, you make those judgment calls. Do not take risks. So the government never told people, you have to come out to work, etc. There were a number of ministries that immediately upon looking at it, and those who are housed in the tall buildings. So the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Finance told me they took that decision yesterday because there was an effect on the lifts. The Minister of Education, the same thing. He touched base yesterday. We saw what was going on in the Ministry of Education building. At government campus, they made arrangements for UDCOT to send in its structural engineers this morning. So it has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. From a government perspective, you put out the principle, don't take unnecessary risk. Touch base with us if we can help in any way whatsoever. But it certainly did not warrant, thankfully, a call for a nationwide shutdown or anything to that effect.
The Prime Minister would have made a comment in telephone interviews and so on concerning the issue of the depth of the earthquake. Had it been at a shallower depth, it could have been even worse.
They may have had worse effects, yes.
And this, I think, would be related, obviously, to the building codes and so on. Is this something that the government will be looking at now to make sure and establish, because you have the situation of both planned and unplanned developments, and there's the question of whether all are at risk to a major earthquake, maybe even worse than what happened last evening?
The truth is, I mean, God forbid you have that major earthquake, there will be damage. Fortunately, in Trinidad and Tobago, as I've said before, even though it is not obligatory to be built to certain codes, via course of conduct, we have been adopting certain codes. So, for example, the Prime Minister told the Cabinet today, I don't think I'm speaking out of school, that fortunately a lot of our government buildings and the major buildings are built to the California Code, which is one of the major areas on the Western Hemisphere that experiences seismic activity. Even in unplanned buildings, fortunately, knock on wood, it does not appear that, well, there wasn't any loss of life, there weren't any serious injuries. That is not something that should be taken for granted. So the answer is yes, I am sure that we will look at implementation of building codes, etc. But fortunately, that is already in practice, that major buildings being built do apply and utilize of their own volition building codes that look at both seismic as well as hurricane winds because of where we're based in Trinidad and Tobago. Gail had her hand up in the back.
Upgrading plans and so forth. We saw a lot of people...
Upgrading plans?
Yeah, national disaster plans.
Right.
This morning, a lot of people were outside of buildings and leaving buildings and so forth. Would the upgrade of the national plan include anything like a national evacuation plan?
Well, I think what we do as a government really is the education and the communication. So in instances like that. So for example, private buildings, private places of employment, landlords, etc., they will come up with their own evacuation plan. But as you say, I have often wondered myself, you see people standing outside a building. It's a tall building, so if things fall, what has that done? I will tell you, on my way to the NOC yesterday, opposite BP, which is around the savannah, they evacuated everybody to the other side of the savannah. So there does not appear, and not under any tree or anything, so no immediate risk of things falling on persons there. So I think each individual entity needs to look at that from a national evacuation point of view and plan. What you really have going on there is the police service then getting out. So we've had it. There have been instances where Port of Spain, for example, that's not a national, but in a capital city, there's been some level of flooding, etc., and you see the long lines of traffic in terms of getting out because an artery out of Port of Spain may be blocked because of water, etc. And what happens in those instances is our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service have to play a more active role in guiding traffic, etc. So there has been discussion that has been discussed at National Security Council, if I remember, about 2 years ago when there was an instance of that at Port of Spain. So these are the things that we're asking the heads of our national security apparatus to look at. You're always improving. What is the better? How can we use technology? So when we got down there yesterday, we asked them, pull up the cameras in certain areas so we could see what is going on, and it gives us a litmus paper test. There was a tsunami warning and watch on. We said, well, where's the Coast Guard out in the Gulf? That is our feedback. We had actually prepared one of the helicopters to go up if we got more reports of damage, so we could do an aerial survey, etc. So there are procedures and protocols in place, and those were activated yesterday. They worked well. There's always room to look and see how we can improve, etc. And that will continue to take place.
In terms of that exercise, helicopter aerial surveys and so forth, any monitoring of the course for the tsunami warning, that tsunami warning is also on the American networks for the area of Trinidad and Tobago as well as Venezuela.
Fortunately, before I did my address yesterday evening, it was cancelled. So we were in touch. The ODPM itself was in touch with the Tsunami Warning Center. So the head of ODPM was able to tell me at 6:15, which is when they retracted it and said it's no longer in effect. He was able to tell me that and to play it for me. And then, so when I was addressing the media, I had that information firsthand.
And so forth, if aftershocks
well, we always have monitoring of the coastlines taking place, etc., from a national security perspective. We have had no untoward reports by the Coast Guard at this stage.
Joe's question about the building codes. As of now, you said it's not mandatory that they build buildings to be earthquake resistant. Yes, some of them,
well,
but should we?
I don't think it's as simple as to say to be earthquake resistant. They're obviously very granular terms in the building codes, etc.
But is that a priority of the government to ensure that we come to a position where it is mandatory and there's a monitoring process to ensure that some of these buildings are built to
this is not something that's sprung up overnight. All right, this is not something that we're seeing and experiencing for the first time. I remember when I had asked about it for another project a few months ago, I was told, look, drafts exist somewhere that I believe that will fall under the Ministry of Planning or the Ministry of Works. So yes, amongst our cabinet colleagues, we are having discussion. This is something that needs to be looked at. I am happy, and I'll repeat it to say, I mean, we are a country that has a lot of energy infrastructure. You all who have been to Point Lisas, etc., would see what is above ground in the energy infrastructure. Thankfully, that was all built according to some codes, and they have, knock on wood, survived, and there are no reports of any damage, etc., etc. So yes, making things an obligation and compulsory, mandatory to be done is one way, and I'm sure it is something we will look at.
Would you address public servants?
Okay, so you could tell me what happened.
Yes, and he spoke about the Ministry of National Security having cracks in their buildings. Screws are missing, and he said 3/4 of the government buildings are deemed unsafe for public servants, and he advised them not to return to those buildings until he gets a report on the structural integrity of these buildings.
You were there and heard him say all of that, so we'll call you as a witness. All right, let me tell you something. That is an instance of complete fear-mongering, because how does Mr. Watson Duke know what screw is missing where? And if you're talking about a screw, how does a screw missing in a door handle affect the safety of the building? The government's position is, and has always been, regardless of what has just happened, if something takes place, we do things properly. You do things scientifically, and you look at the evidence. So immediately upon this taking place yesterday, as the Minister of National Security, I was in touch with the Minister of Works and Transport, and he assured me that the engineers were going out there. Their first port of call, so to speak, was to check the bridges and the structural integrity of the bridges, because of course persons are going home, cars crossing bridges, and we then immediately move to government buildings. I am not an expert, I am not an engineer. There are cracks that will appear, some will be just surface level cracks, etc., etc. That is what the engineers are looking at. And for Mr. Watson Duke to go on to try and cause some sort of unnecessary panic or unnecessary anxiety is very wrong. This government and this administration will not ask any worker to enter any area that is unsafe. In fact, as we have come in as an administration, we have moved some ministries out of buildings when we became aware of evidence that they were condemned since 2009. And we didn't hear Mr. Watson Duke during that whole period of time making any fuss about it. But as soon as these things come to our attention, we take the decisions, because we are in the practice of ensuring the public safety and security of persons. So again, I expect every ministry, every government building to do what is responsible, to have them checked out for the structural integrity. It is impossible for Watson Duke to have said that with any level of authority this morning. And if he said that, then his membership should actually hold him responsible for being negligent, because that is a suggestion that he knew beforehand something was wrong with a building. Because I can guarantee you he didn't go around to every government building in the last 12 hours to satisfy himself as to whether they were in a fit and proper state. So if Mr. Watson Duke is now telling the population and the public servants and the members of his association and the government that he had information that he's withheld, that go to the public safety, he is personally responsible for that, and we'd like him to answer that. But what I can tell you from a government perspective, in the meantime, we are doing all that we can. I spoke to Minister Sinanan before he left, and he assured me that we even have private engineers volunteering to come and assist us in this program of ensuring the structural integrity of all of the buildings, starting with the government buildings. We've asked, as I said, those that the government tenants, the private landlords, to provide us with the certification, etc. So to Mr. Watson Duke and the others who want to play politics at this time, the government is not deterred. We're not confused by it. We're not affected by it. We will continue to fulfill our responsibility to ensure the safety and security of those who fall under us.
On continuing along that topic and the concern that you raised about people or groups spreading fake news, particularly at a time like this, and outside of the official communications, so you put up channels that you put out there where people should go to and ignore the others, would any action be taken against anybody who is proven to be spreading fake news, rather than just saying, only listen to this, don't listen to that, but a lot of other people out there will still listen to some of these people?
Correct. There is no specific legislation in place as yet that deals with that phenomenon. There may be other pieces of legislation that exist. For example, if you cause people to panic, etc. I'm not 100% certain. That will fall under the ambit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. At this stage, what the government is saying is we're denouncing that type of behavior. There is, before a Joint Select Committee of Parliament, a cybercrime bill, that the Attorney General is the head of that Joint Select Committee, and I believe it should be coming out shortly. If that law were in place, then it would be a specific criminal offense for this type of activity and behavior taking place. And I look forward to the day that that legislation is in place, even for instances of things like cyberbullying, etc.
When you're talking about the types of damage and concerns about Port of Spain and other areas, now, I think within the last 24 hours...
I didn't limit it to Port of Spain,
to
Trinidad and Tobago.
One particular seismologist, a pretty long name, I can't remember his whole name now, but I think you're familiar with the character. You may know the individual, who he is, but he made the argument that because of where Port of Spain is in a type of a basin type area, and because we've been experiencing a lot of flooding and the infrastructure underneath there is not particularly good, that in the case of a major earthquake, the city stands the risk of sinking. Is that something that the cabinet, that government is looking at in terms of the whole scheme of...
Again, I am not certain who the seismologist that you're referring to is, and I haven't heard that myself. If any of this type of information comes to us at the cabinet level, we will take the decisions along the lines of what I just said to ensure the safety and security of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. There is absolutely no such information before the cabinet. This is the first I'm hearing of that. There was a discussion that because of where Trinidad and Tobago is located, and I am not a geologist, where it's located along certain plates, etc., we can and we have always experienced certain movements and certain seismic effects, etc. I have nothing before me at this stage to evidence or to support what you've just informed me about, the capital of Port of Spain sinking anyway. The truth is, yesterday was a significant seismic event. So we're not dealing with a hypothetical. We experienced that yesterday. I have heard today, yesterday was at 6.9. I've heard today it was over 7 on the seismic measurement scale. At the end of the day, thankfully, and again I knock on wood, we survived it. Nobody was injured, no fatalities, etc. And we continue to monitor it. We continue to look at it. We continue to see what needs to be done.
So far as up to the aftershock this morning, what would you say were the hardest hit areas? Northwest, north?
It is very, very difficult to say. I have not been provided. So, for example, I spoke to the Minister of Local Government and Rural Development this morning. We spoke quite early, I think at about 7 o'clock. And I spoke to him last night as well, that one of the areas we get that type of information from are the local corporations, the municipal corporations, because they are the local bodies on the ground. And we need them to feed it back. I asked or reminded, because there is a protocol and a policy in place that has to be fed back to the ODPM, and I've asked the ODPM as soon as it comes to filter it out to all of those who need to know, meaning there's a group of the decision makers, and we need to know that information. When that information becomes available, I am sure that the ODPM will pass it on to the public.
Down the island, say Centipede Island, where that chunk of rock
Well, I would hope by this stage, I mean, it is about prioritization of resources at this stage, right? So we have limited resources that we can send here, there, and everywhere. Centipede Island, as far as I'm aware, is still an uninhibited island. There's no one there. So I don't put that very high up on the priority scale. But the Coast Guard are patrolling those areas, and I'm sure that if there are things to be reported, it will be reported to the Coast Guard, who would then feed it back to the diffusion center.
There were reports of pockets of robberies following yesterday's earthquake. As Minister of National Security,
reports where?
Well, I know one of my colleagues was robbed in Citygate yesterday.
As a result of the earthquake?
No. There were pockets of robberies following the earthquake yesterday, not as a result, but following the earthquake. As Minister of National Security, you had any such reports?
As I say, I made my way immediately to the fusion center, where there is information coming in. That was one of the areas that was being monitored. No specific report was provided to me as the Minister of National Security that as a result of the seismic activity, the earthquake, these are the crimes that were committed. So there's been no correlation between the two. What you tell me about there obviously has me concerned, because that is one of our major hubs and transport areas. I am sure that the police are listening. I will also raise it with the police with a suggestion that, that they look at these things. And in particular, in those types of areas and instances, ensure that we have a proper police presence, etc. So no, there was no specific report that there were pockets, and that was one of the things we discussed immediately at the National Operations Center, and why the Commissioner of Police and the Deputy Commissioner of Police issued instructions. They were in constant contact with all of the divisional heads, and even the police stations. So at one stage they were saying, look, the Maracas and Blanchiseuses police stations have just said they're without electricity. Oh, here it's come back up when it came back up, etc. And the Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner of Police did give the instructions, look, get out there, be mobile, be seen, help people who need help, etc. And I'm happy to report, having gone through the night period, there were no instances of any untoward behavior as a result of the earthquake.
Given what you, also given the fact that we are not certain, as you just said a little while ago, about any aftershocks, or if we might have any other earthquakes per se, and given where the location where this incident happened, is the government certain that it is safe for the Prime Minister and his delegation to go to Venezuela if we are still in a state of unpredictability? Could he and the delegation be at risk if they go there?
You all are putting a lot of speculative concepts to me, and I've stood in this room many times and said I don't like to speculate. We plan and we operate on the basis of evidence and information and intelligence in front of us. Obviously, if we think there's any risk to the Prime Minister or any citizen of Trinidad and Tobago in going to an area, in the Prime Minister's case, we will advise and suggest it doesn't take place. In our citizens' case, we would say, look, this is an area we don't think that it's safe for Trinidad citizens to go. As at this stage, based on all of the information we have, those are the current plans. The same way we had plans to be signing right now, and that changed late last night, plans are always susceptible to change. But we make those decisions based on information before us, intelligence before us, and we make it on those bases. Come on.
Exactly why the decision was taken to go to Venezuela, at whose request and so on?
Well, I mean, as I said, the epicenter, I think is the right phraseology, of the earthquake was closer to Venezuela. In speaking to them last night, it was just felt, look, they had requested, as a result of it, that we come on Saturday morning instead. And the Prime Minister immediately said, look, he doesn't have a problem for that. He would readjust his schedule. We will go there because we could understand if that request was made of us. But by that stage, we had already put everything in place for it to be taking place here in Trinidad at this time. Jules.
Speak of the first responders, the police, fire service, also the military and so on. Any particular focus or emphasis on the buildings that house them while they're on duty? Police stations, fire stations, Coast Guard base, regiment base, etc.
I don't know, when you use the phraseology, any specific emphasis. As I've said, obviously an assessment has to be done of all government buildings. Those institutions are the institutions in charge of their own property, where they reside, etc. So I would expect if they see any issues, they would then contact the Ministry of Works and Transport, the engineers, etc., to have it looked at. As you bring that up, yesterday afternoon I was actually at the maximum security prison and the remand yard. I had gone for a visit, and I saw last night it appeared as though a prisoner had put up a video, and I've seen all of you all broadcasting it on your news items, of a crack in the maximum security prison, and I thought it quite ironic. I was there literally. It's when I left there and was coming back to Port-au-Spain, as I just left, that the earthquake took place. There are going to be cracks, so I would expect that the prison service, they haven't reported anything to me as the Minister of National Security of any concerns with the prisons. There will be cracks, there may be some damage, and I would expect them to do like everybody else and go through it and have the right engineers look at it, provide an assessment. If they have concerns, then they will bring it. At this stage, fortunately, or maybe it's too premature, I have not gotten any such reports.
Have you seen a report from the Commissioner of Police about the success of the patrols? Because a lot of people have said in their communities they did not really see an increase in police presence, and I'm talking about communities South, Central, East, and West.
The Commissioner of Police throughout, when we were engaged last night, and then even afterwards, we continued to all be corresponding to make sure we were all aware of what was going on, did not give any negative feedback. Again, you're always going to have persons saying, well, I didn't see this, I didn't see that. I'm a MP, I'm a representative. I walk in my constituency all the time. You'll come across people, they'll say, look, I see you, I didn't see you. And you say, but hold on, I was here a month ago. They say, yeah, but what happened in between? So, these are the phenomena you're always going to face. You're obviously not going to have a police officer stationed outside of everyone's house or communities. I leave the policing work up to the police. If there were real levels of concern and incidents, untoward incidents had taken place and it showed that there was not a proper police presence, well, then that's something that we would get involved as a government and say, look, from a policy position, what went on there, should we do an analysis? Fortunately, we've had none of that.
Earlier on in News, the president of the Fire Services Association had raised some concerns and that more emphasis is placed on resources for the fire service, as it is, as he said, the lead responding agency in terms of natural disasters.
I can tell you that the fire service is playing a high level of priority in my interaction. Interestingly enough, I have been trying to get in contact with Mr. Leo Ramkisoon, and I was unable to do so. But when I was up at prisons yesterday, my office contacted me to say he was trying to contact me. I intend to meet with him and his officers of the Fire Officers Association as soon as possible. I can tell you that last week, ironically, I had called in all of the heads of security last week because I want us all sitting at the same table. And it is to start planning I told them as one of my areas of priority, I wanted to know what were the contingency plans in case something happens. And that meeting took place last week, Friday, and I invited the chief fire officer to be with us, because recognizing that depending on what it could be, because I can't predict what it would be, that fire officers and the fire service may very well be first responders. So he is now sitting amongst us. Last night he was invited. He came down to meet with us again as a body. So the fire service is there. All of the arms of the protective service have their own issues. Yesterday I had very fruitful meeting and conversation with Mr. Seren Richard and his officers. I will wait for them to tell their side of the story. But I decided I was not going to sit in a suit in an office in Port of Spain to hear about the issues that the prison service would have. I went to them. I started off at the maximum security prison. I then went to remand yard, did a walkthrough in the remand yard, actually spoke to prisoners. Who were previously on death row when I was at maximum security prison, and to interact with both the prison officers as well as the prisoners to have a first-hand understanding of some of the issues they face. And that will be, as the Minister of National Security, that is going to be my modus operandi with all of the bodies going forward. Okay. Any other? Yes.
Question. Do you know of anyone whose home may have suffered damage as a result of the earthquake, if they have come to government seeking temporary shelter?
There are a number of homes that have suffered damage. So I can say, as a member of Parliament, photographs were sent to me of certain homes that had suffered damage, as you would expect with the magnitude of the earthquake that we felt yesterday. And also, as you all would all know by now, the longer you feel the effects of it is the more damage that is done. Thankfully, it was at as the Prime Minister said, and he told us in Cabinet this morning, it was at quite a depth. If it was a little shallower, it may have been worse. So yes, I expect that there are a number of homes and houses around Trinidad and Tobago that would have suffered damage, and they would be reaching out to the various government bodies for help, social development, as I say, the first responders of the various municipal corporations, etc. Okay? All right, so I thank you all very much and also to thank the media, because you all have been doing a good job of covering the event, etc. Yesterday evening, I'd like to thank some of you all for making the effort when I reached out, because it became apparent that we should address the government, should address the public, just to instill and ensure a sense of calm and to let them know that we were doing what we had to be doing, and there are plans and protocols that had been implemented and were taking place. I would like to thank all of you all. You all know who you are, for working along with the government to get our messaging across. Thank you all very much.